Cambridge is fortunate in having quite a large collection of Arthurian manuscripts, and one of the most impressive of these is the manuscript with the romantic name Additional 7071.
Additional 7071 is one of the most physically impressive manuscripts that we have in the whole exhibition. It's part of a long prose cycle of romances discussing Lancelot, the quest for the Holy Grail,
which is a large collection of narratives relating mainly to the Knights of the Round Table. And in this particular witness, there is a copy of the story relating to the search for the Holy Grail, what's known as the Roman de Merlin, obviously about Merlin. There's also a unique section of the narrative here which relates to the early days of King Arthur's reign, and the manuscript closes with the continuation of the Merlin material.
It came from Ribston Hall in Yorkshire, and this used to be a priory of the Knights Templar, so we might wonder if some of the chivalric values, which are detailed in the Arthurian cycle, are in fact of interest to its earliest readers.
Of course, the Prose Lancelot is part of the most amazingly popular stories of the Middle Ages. There are hundreds of manuscripts of the material in general, and almost 100 of the Lancelot in particular, and it was known throughout all of Europe. For instance, in Dante's Divine Comedy in Inferno 5, where Paolo and Francesca commit adultery, it is inspired by reading about Lancelot's passion for Guinevere that they do so.
The manuscript came to Cambridge from a private library in Yorkshire and evidently had not been touched for several centuries. It was found at the bottom of a chest with several other different scrolls. So it had obviously been placed in there by its last medieval reader, and it had lain there undisturbed. Excitingly, this meant that the manuscript's medieval binding was completely intact.
And what's particularly exciting is that it's in its original medieval binding, its 15th century binding, which is unusual insofar as tradition in the great collections of the 18th and 19th century. It was usual for manuscripts to be put in standard bindings, so they look nice and neat on the shelves. In the case of 7071, however, the backstory of the manuscript is such that this didn't happen.
The medieval binding of the manuscript is also rather unusual. Many manuscripts have since been rebound in the 18th or 19th century, but here we can see that this has still got all the original 15th century bindings. Quite a bit of the text was copied in the 14th century, but then it was bound in this form in the 15th century. Rather interestingly, it's still got the original paste downs on both covers. These were bits of old manuscripts.
Sheets of old vellum from worn-out manuscripts that were, as the name suggests, glued on the inside of the wooden boards which form the outer covers in order to protect the manuscript, because, of course, because manuscripts are written on skin, it's relatively easy to rub away at the ink and it becomes quite effaced eventually.
The glue inside the manuscript holding it together has degraded a bit, and this means that we can see even further inside it to how the manuscript has been held together. Because vellum has a natural curve, getting the pages to line up in a neat stack is a bit problematic. So on the inside edge, you can see that the manuscript has been held together with small strips of skin that have been whittled, and this means they were treated with alum in order to make them tough. So that's how the spine is held together. And on the other side, on the outer edge of the bindings, we can see that there are metal clasps, or there were. We've got traces of metal clasps, and these held the manuscripts shut and protected the pages.